Hey there, Dr. Anna Maria Helt here, herbalist and microbiologist at Osada Natural Health. Today I'm kicking off a series called Mushroom Monday where I'm going to feature all things mushroomy each Monday. So a little video on the fungi in case people are missing the videos that I was doing on mushrooms throughout the summer. And we're going to start that out this week with lion's mane mushroom. So mushrooms in the genus Hericium. Lion's mane is but one of the many common names, and Hericium as a genus has multiple species in it throughout the world. Many different continents have these mushrooms growing there. So in Japan, speaking of common names, they are called Yamabushi take. Take means mushroom. So when you read things like maitake or hear about them, shiitake, this mushroom as well. Mushroom. Take means mushroom. And Yamabushi means those who sleep in the mountains. So it's a very beautiful poetic name for this very beautiful and yummy mushroom. There are lots of common names for this mushroom. I learned it as lion's mane when I took my very first mushroom class, and that's what stuck for me. Another name is pom-pom blanc, basically white pom-pom. And my understanding is a chef in San Francisco who used it at their restaurant came up with that name. Bearded tooth is another name, which when I show you a close-up of one of these, maybe that'll make sense. Lots of other names for this great mushroom. So lion's mane is found in the wild. There are multiple species of this Hericium genus found on multiple continents, and it is somewhat common in the wetter parts of North America. We do have a native species here in the Rocky Mountains, but I've yet to find it because, we're a lot drier here than where I started learning medicinal mushrooms on the Pacific Coast, where you are going to be, you're going to have a lot higher odds of finding it. The one you're seeing here growing on the log is actually in Fairmount Park in the middle of Philadelphia, of all places, where I'm originally from, that area. And so you can see this gigano one here, this big, beautiful white blob. And then there are 1, 2, 3 other smaller ones growing. If you take a look around the log, you'll be able to pick them out. There's a teeny tiny one just to the left of that sapling, and then a couple small ones in the upper right-hand side of the corner. So lion's mane is largely a saprophytic fungus, which is science terminology, meaning that it grows on dead or decaying organic matter. In this case, we're talking about dead wood or dying wood. So I learned, or I was taught, to look up when walking around in the woods to find lion mane, because it'll often be found higher up in the branches of a tree or in the crook of a tree, but this one was on a downed log. So look everywhere if you're out in the woods. Now, there's some evidence that sometimes this can be a parasitic fungus on trees, so meaning growing on live trees and killing them. And there's even more recent evidence that this might be an endophyte. Endo meaning inside of, phyte meaning plant, so growing inside of a live tree but not killing it, and then sometimes sending the fruiting body, or what we think of as the mushroom, outside of the tree, growing on the bark there to reproduce. So this is a wild one. Not everybody lives in an area where there are wild fungi growing, or has access to get to the woods to go harvest wild mushrooms. Lion's mane, luckily, is very, very easy to grow at home, and it's really fun to do this. So these are just a couple of examples of what a growing kit will often look like. These are from 2 different commercial companies that offer these kits online, and we'll ship them to you. And what you're seeing here is the very beginning stages where you prep the culture, which is often a block of something like sawdust inside of a little growth bag, a humidity tent. You put some holes in it, you disturb the surface of the growth substrate, and you just make sure this thing stays moist by spraying it daily with water. You don't want to use tap water, but distilled water, or maybe that spring water that you can sometimes buy at the grocery store. And if you're patient, you will eventually get some fruiting body formation. So the one on the left here is in very early stages of growing, but you can see that little blob just starting to go. And then on the right, you can see an honest to goodness lion's mane mushroom. Now, I let this one grow quite a bit longer. This was just a little bit earlier on. Very fun to grow, very easy to grow. They're delicious, so you could harvest them and eat them if you want. You'll get a lot of their medicinal benefits doing that. I make more concentrated extracts, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And then here are some of the fruiting bodies or mushrooms that I harvested. They're adorable. And so you can see why they call them pom-pom blanc or bearded tooth. So these are two mushrooms from actually two different growing kits that I did at different times that I harvested. And you want to harvest them before they start discoloring. They should be a nice, lovely white-ish color here. If they start turning brown or other colors, you want to get them off, or it might be too late at that point and they might have other stuff growing on them. And like I said, these are delicious edible mushrooms. They're gourmet mushrooms, but for me, I tend to make concentrated extracts of them for use for myself and in my practice. So what you're looking at here in this jar is what's called a double extract. And basically what that means, without going into detail, is it's a combination of a mushroom alcohol extract, traditionally known as a tincture, and then a strong mushroom tea known as a decoction. And you're going for alcohol-soluble constituents here and water-soluble constituents of the mushroom, and then combining them so that you're getting the best of both worlds. If you want to learn how to do a double extract of this or other mushrooms, you can go to my website, osada.com, that I've got listed here. Do a search for double extracts and you'll get some info there. So what I'm going to focus on today is the use of this mushroom for digestive health, digestive system support. Traditional use of this mushroom going back for a very long time in Japan and China, elsewhere in that part of the world. Traditional usage, one big branch of it focused on digestive health. There were many other uses not related to digestive health in those parts of the world, but digestive health was a big one. And so for things like gastritis, whenever you see the word itis, it means inflammation. So gastro, stomach inflammation, inflammation of the stomach lining. So that was one of the traditional, or is one of the traditional uses. Something called epigastric pain, which basically means pain kind of over the stomach area. So, a tummy ache, basically. And acid reflux, which is a class I just taught about recently. That was is another traditional usage of the mushroom. Stomach and duodenal ulcers. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine that the stuff coming out of our stomach hits on its way south in our digestive tract. And it's where the pancreas secretes bicarbonate to neutralize stomach acid, and it's where our pancreatic enzymes get dumped into the small intestines, where the major portion of our digestion happens. Lion's mane has centuries of use for digestive tract cancers and prevention as well in China, in Japan, and such. In traditional Chinese medicine, the mushroom is used to nourish the intestines and to strengthen the spleen. And you might be like, what the hell does the spleen have to do with digestion? The organs in Chinese medicine don't necessarily translate to our Western medical concept of organs. So in traditional Chinese medicine, among its other jobs, the spleen is in charge roughly of helping with nutrient assimilation and transport around the body. And it does other things as well. And so this is, based on that, a tonic to help us better assimilate what we're getting out of our food. Now, as a scientist, I like to look at what the research has to say. As an herbalist, I like to see what the tradition has to say. So I tend to combine those two in my classes and writings and such. And so there are lab studies that jive with the usage that comes out of tradition when it comes to things going awry along the gastrointestinal tract. So for instance, in rodent models, which admittedly suck, one, for the rodents, but two, because they don't necessarily reflect what's going on in us. But such as it is, in rodent models of inflammatory bowel issues, experimental models, it was found that lion's mane could actually help counter the damage that would happen in the intestines due to inflammatory issues. And then in 2011 and 2013, some studies came out where mice were inoculated with colon cancer cell lines. So colon cancer cell lines that are maintained in a dish in tissue culture. These poor rodents were inoculated with these cell lines, and what it was found in these two studies is that either water extracts or alcohol-based extracts had beneficial effects in the studies. In both studies, tumor shrinkage was seen, tumor burden, that's called, in one of the studies where they looked at the spread of those tumor cells to the lungs. That's a process called metastasis when they move around the body. The number of metastases in the lungs was reduced by the mushroom, and when the researchers were, and by the way, the mushroom extracts were as good as, if not better than, 5-fluorouracil, which is an actual chemotherapy drug used in human colon cancers. Now, the authors of these studies started looking mechanistically at, oh, well, gee, what could be going on here? And at least in vitro, meaning in cell culture-based data and test tube type studies, it was found that proteins involved in the ability of cancer cells to kind of get out of where they are and spread through the body, they were inhibited. MMP were inhibited. These are extracellular matrix rearranging proteins that are involved in metastases. Also in vitro studies, angiogenesis, which is the generation of new blood vessels, that was inhibited. That is a target for cancer therapy because when a tumor grows, it stimulates new blood vessel growth to feed itself in kind of this insidious process. Also, mechanistically speaking, the mushroom increased natural killer cell activity in the rodents themselves. Natural killer cells are a type of immune cell that are important for the ability to deal with tumor cells. Macrophage activity, another important immune cell, was also induced in these models. Now, I like to see research studies that are backing up traditional usage. I like to consider them both as an herbalist and a scientist. But what I am not saying here, to be clear, is to ditch your chemotherapy or your radiation treatment or whatever you may be going through if you do happen to be suffering from a tumor and starting on a mushroom. I'm not telling you to discontinue what you're doing. I'm giving you some information about what we know from the research and traditional usage for your education. Now, to be clear as well, with these rodent models, they're pretty contrived models, right? This doesn't represent the natural history of the cancer itself. Colon cancer develops in the colon over years through a stepwise process. And so inoculating a rodent with tumor cells isn't the same, right? So this may or may not reflect the reality in people. But again, it does agree with traditional use. And I just always get a kick out of seeing that. Now, there was actually a clinical study, which means in people, and the purpose of the study was to look at the use of lion's mane for something called atrophic gastritis. What this means is that the stomach lining is being damaged by something, and this, aside from causing discomfort, is also causing reduced stomach secretions, so it's having a negative impact on digestion. That, in turn, can lead to long-term nutritional deficiencies, can lead to inflammation in the gut, which contributes to chronic systemic inflammation. Now, the etiology, the cause of atrophic gastritis, in many cases is a bacterium known as Helicobacter pylori, or the famous H. pylori that's linked with stomach ulcers, stomach cancer. But there's another group of people where this problem in the stomach seems to be coming from an autoimmune issue, where the immune system is actually damaging some of the secretory cells in the stomach lining and causing problems that way. So in this study with the use of lion's mane, what the researchers found is that the people in the study who were getting the mushroom versus the placebo control had reduced discomfort, had reduced epigastric pain. There were reduced signs of intestinal dysplasia. What the heck does that mean? Dysplasia is abnormal tissue growth, abnormal cell proliferation. It's not necessarily cancer, though. It's like a precursor, and not necessarily a precursor, but it can be a precursor to cancer. But dysplasia is when cells are proliferating irregularly. They're not being controlled the way that they should. Also, infiltration of immune cells into the stomach lining was reduced. So inflammatory mediators of the immune system, there were fewer of them hanging around in the stomach following treatment with the mushroom compared to treatment with placebo. Now, in terms of coming back to in vitro studies, so this is cell culture stuff, it suggested that water soluble component of the mushrooms, particularly the polysaccharides, but also non-water soluble stuff are active in these various assays and tests that I'm talking about in terms of different models of inflammation along the digestive tract. And I mentioned already that I like to use double extracts for mushrooms when I'm supporting my own health or that of clients in my practice. And the reason for that is because you have water in that, extracting water-soluble constituents, polysaccharides, but many other things. And then you have ethanol in it, alcohol, extracting non-water soluble stuff, but alcohol-soluble stuff. And then you're combining them. Although eating lion's mane is a good thing as well. Yeah, it's maybe not as strong as using a double extract, but it's delicious. And why not do it for just a little bit of preventative health and keeping your gut happy? What else did I want to say? So, rodent studies, in vitro studies, cell culture studies, they don't necessarily, and often they don't reflect what's going on in people, but they can provide interesting data that researchers will then follow up on more and look into in more detail. For instance, looking at things like mechanism and stuff. I always look first to tradition, like I said, as a traditional herbalist. So these very ancient uses to support the health of that donut through us, our gastrointestinal tract, by different cultures. But it is fun to look at both the tradition and the science and see where they perhaps agree or where they don't. So I think I will leave it at that. So welcome to Mushroom Monday #1, and I'm going to be continuing these week after week, featuring different mushrooms, different aspects around different mushrooms, all things fungal. So stay tuned, and if you have any questions or comments, I always do read through the comments section. Be well, everyone.